So let's talk about advanced topic. Currently the situation, and likely potentially the situation for at least the next year and a half or so, right, is that interest rates are very high now. We need to think about this concept called risk premium, right? So in the past, about 2 years back, what will happen is that interest rates were basically non-existent, right? So you get a fixed deposit, you're lucky if it's somewhere between 0.5% and 1%, right? Nowadays, you can get a fixed deposit for somewhere between 3.5 and 4%. Like the difference is humongous, and similar to T-bills, for the most part, everybody assumes that the government and the institutions in Singapore are extremely good for it. It's basically guaranteed. That's what we call your risk-free rate, right? Which means that if I can get 4%, without taking any kind of risk, then that's 4%, right? Risk premium is typically defined by how much additional risk you need to take for additional return. In simple English, most people will not take additional risks, means they will not want to risk losing their capital for a very small gain. So for example, if I can offer you 4% with no risk at all versus 6% with a certain probability or fluctuation in your capital, most people will not take that deal. They will not take the 6% because the risk premium is just too high. Yeah, because the additional 2% is not worth the risk in a nutshell. Very simple, right? The normal calculations that I teach my consultants to do is to assume risk premium times 2 plus 1, right? So what this means is that in the event that your risk-free rate is 4%, means your client has access to an instrument that is giving 4% consistently with no risk to them whatsoever. You have to offer them an investment that is producing at least 9. Otherwise, frankly speaking, they're not going to take it. Yeah. In any situation whatsoever, if you even make an offer, means we're not even talking about the specifics of the offer, right? So how you figure out the 9% is something we'll cover in later chapters. I'm just pointing out that if you try to be a very, for lack of a better word, very level-headed ethical consultant, or you're just not very intelligent and you haven't done a lot of research and you're like, okay, the best investment I have right now is 7, right? If you present 7% when risk-free rate is 4, the client is gone. 99% of the time, no chance at all. The risk premium is just too high. It does not make sense for them. Because the higher the treasury bill goes up, the more I have to offer a higher investment return to account for risk premium, right? You see, and so realistically, what is happening for my business is that normally you would try to offer a standard investment return of somewhere between 8 and 10, right? Which is reasonable. You see, it's realistic is reasonable, right? 8 and 10 is not a very strong proposition when your risk-free rate is 4. 8 and 10 is a crazy strong proposition when your risk-free rate is 1. Make sense? Yeah. So even at 4% risk rate, even if you're offering 8 and 10, some people will still find it very, very questionable, right? So the minimum risk-free rate you can offer is times 2 plus 1, which means that if I offer anything that is less than 9, the client will just be switch off. Like forget it. It's just not going to happen, right? Because you get a lot for no risk whatsoever, right? So this is actually based on behavioral finance studies, right? So they basically did a situation where, for example, let's say you and I, let's flip a coin, okay? So every time I flip a coin, we know it's 50-50, right? So if it lands heads, you get $1. If it lands tails, you give me $1, right? Most people will not agree to this because it's a crap deal for the most part, yeah? So the risk-free rate is basically zilch, right? And so the risk to you is not small as well, right? So the tolerance was somewhere between 2 and 3 times, which means that let's say we do the same thing, flip a coin. If it hits, you get $2 to $3. It tails, you give me $1. Most people will take this, yeah? But they will not take less than this, yeah? Even at, let's say, 150, 180, most people will still not take it because the risk-free rate is just not there. Yeah, and so or at least the risk, the amount of risk that you're taking for the potential reward is just not as sufficient. So the general way to address your risk-free rate of 4%, or in how to get a proposition above that, is usually times 2 plus 1. Very basic math to kind of set a minimum standard for what kind of investment return you need to present to a client, just as a presentation in order for them to stay at the table, right? So that is really the situation which a lot of consultants are in now, because you have very little to offer to a client when the whole world, your fixed deposits, your T-bills, all that are all available to you. Yeah. So it's very, very important for you guys to understand that risk premium is such a huge thing, right? Means that you have to understand that, okay, like clients are not going to accept the whatever results you used to give them means if you are comfortable giving them 6%, 7%, right? And that's because, you know, like if you go and deposit your money in a bank, you know, the standard argument is that okay, you can only get 0.5%, you can only get like 0.1%, or you can get 1%. But well, if you invest in me, you can get like 6, you can get 7, you can get 8, right? That's not gonna fly already. You have to offer at least times 2 plus 1. And how you figure that out is something that we'll try to cover. But for the most part, I'm just setting the tone that you gotta do this.